Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see this turnout to our first regularly scheduled seminar series talk of 2016 to actually happen. And I'm also very glad that we have Professor Rhiannon Dawn with us today. Professor Dawn teaches academic writing here at Nipissing, where she has been for about 9 years. And among her current research interests is, she tells me, is performativity in social media. So something a little to the side of the subject she'll be talking about today. But I think at this point I'll just turn the floor over to Rhiannon Dawn on her subject, Staking the Nation, Historic Sites, Interpretation, and National Identity.
Thanks. So I'd like to start out by thanking all of you for coming today. It's really exciting to see this many people here. I was sort of afraid that there would be my husband and a couple of people from the English department, and that would be it. So it's really great to see that there are so many of you here. The work that I'm talking about today was my major research paper for my master's degree at the University of Guelph. And I did this in the summer of 2005, so this is actually the first time that I've come back to it since I did it, so it's been very interesting to revisit this work that's about 11 years old now, and sort of see what I think about what I did, because it's not, what I think about it now is maybe not quite what I thought about it back in 2005. So, as time passes, historical events become increasingly distant and remote as the principal characters disappear into the shadows of the past. They become great figures, stereotypes, heroes and rascals who live only in our imagination. If you've ever been to Ste. Marie among the Hurons in Midland, Ontario, the reconstruction of what was once Ontario's first European settlement, you may remember those words from the slideshow that introduces visitors to the site and its history. If you have, you'll certainly remember the garage door that opens up at the end of the slideshow with the words, "Come, see for yourselves." And then you see this in front of you. Out on the site, you'll encounter a number of different people in 17th century costumes, some of whom are dressed as Jesuit priests in long black cassocks. So I've got those out of order. There we go. Some who are dressed as laborers, and some who are dressed as the Huron people, all of whom have extensive knowledge of this brief moment in Canadian history and who have been trained to perform that knowledge for visitors on a daily basis. So if, as Benedict Anderson has suggested, the nation is an imagined community, what is involved in that imagining? One of the key apparatuses in establishing the nation and, accordingly, a sense of national identity is the history of the nation. The shared knowledge of a set of historic events can foster a sense of national pride and make a statement about what it means to belong to a country. In short, what it means to be Canadian. Given the role that history plays in developing and establishing national identity, living history museums and historic sites become a stage on which the nation can be performed. Staffed by costumed interpreters, these museums and sites open up an intriguing opportunity for study. How is Canada performed? Whose Canada is being performed? What does it mean to perform the nation? How does the performance of the nation become the nation? And what factors affect the performance of nationhood? So with these things in mind, I decided to take a close look at the practices of historical interpretation at Ste. Marie among the Hurons. My research examined a variety of different sources, including some written texts, including the Jesuit Relations, as well as some of the training manuals that the staff are given by Huronia Historical Parks, which runs the site, by looking at the physical space or the stage of Ste. Marie among the Hurons, and finally by actually talking to some of the people who work there and getting their perspective on what they felt about the work that they were doing. Through my research, I was able to demonstrate how Canada and Canadianness take shape as a performance within this context, as well as discuss how changes to that performance over time mirror social change in Canada. So if our sense of national identity takes its roots in our conceptualization and production of Canadian history is also taking shape as a result of what our current-day concerns about our country are. Thus, when history becomes performative, as it does at living history museums, the performances it engenders necessarily reflect those conceptions of nationhood and national identity. I chose to focus on Ste. Marie among the Hurons for a number of different reasons. One of which was the fact that at the time I'd been working there for about 6 years during the summer. So I was intimately familiar with the site and its history. But there are a number of other ways in which it was really ideal for this kind of thing. First and foremost, it's a piece of French history in what is otherwise a British province, and in a province that is primarily English-speaking. It's one of the few historic sites in Ontario that is not British or naval military in its origin. The people who work there today are predominantly English-speaking Canadians and female, unlike in the 17th century when it would have been predominantly French-speaking men who were there. And one of the other reasons that I thought this was particularly interesting is that national identity was also something that people were really concerned about in the 17th century, particularly for the French who came to New France, because they had to go to considerable lengths to maintain their identities as French in a new country that they often described as savage. And I thought that it would work particularly well that that concern with national identity existed both within the past, the moment being both within the past, the moment being interpreted, and in the present at the moment of interpretation. In studying how Ste. Marie represents Canada, there's ample opportunity to think about the relationship between historic sites and national identity. For this, I thought about two particular areas. I wanted to focus on the textual resources that the interpreters are given, such as the resource and operations manuals that Huronia Historical Parks produces for them. And I also wanted to think about the theatrical performance that they were being asked to do, the practice of interpretation, and in particular on their relationship or their interactions with the visitors who come to Ste. Marie. And I've tried to supplement this by including some of the observations of the people who actually work there. The fieldwork portion of the research took place in the summer of 2005. I initially approached the interpreters as a group and asked for volunteers to participate in the study. I left behind information letters and consent forms for anybody who was interested. The first half of the research asked interested parties to fill out a short questionnaire asking questions about their backgrounds and their approaches to interpretation. As one of the conditions set by Huronia Historical Parks in allowing me to do this, all of the surveys and interviews had to be done on people's lunch breaks. Initially, 15 people responded to the written questionnaire, and then from that I asked people to participate in interviews with me. The interview process was more intensive since the interviews usually took somewhere between a half hour and 45 minutes, so people had to come to work early or give up most of their lunch to talk to me. And so with the scheduling, I actually only wound up with 9 interviews altogether. The interpreters that became involved came from a variety of different backgrounds. They ranged in age from 18 to 25, and all of them were either university students or university graduates. Out of the original 15 people who responded to the written part of the questionnaire, one of them was working at Ste. Marie for the first time and had been there for about a month at the time that she took the survey. One of them had been there for 5 years, and everybody else was somewhere in between that first year and 5th year. Everybody who responded to the survey was of European background, predominantly British ancestry, although a few of them did also make note of their French heritage. So in order to give you a sense of how the argument deploys, I think it's important to talk a little bit about Ste. Marie in both the 17th century context as well as the context of the Reconstruction that took place in the 1960s. So Huronia, or the general area, theoretically I have a slide for. Often bills itself as the cradle of Ontario's history. and it refers to the area that's roughly the northern half of Simcoe County, so from Elmvale on up through Midland and Penetanguishene. The history of this region has an impressive pedigree. Samuel de Champlain and Etienne Brulé both passed through the area in the early part of the 17th century. Its indigenous people at one time would have controlled the majority of the fur trade in North America, and when Ste. Marie was built in 1639, it had the first European community in Ontario. The mission community, which is roughly where the town of Midland is today, was known in the 17th century as Saint-Marie au Pays des Hurons, or Ste. Marie among the Hurons, and at that time it would have been inhabited by a revolving cast of characters, including the Jesuits, a handful of soldiers, and laborers who were both volunteers and who were paid. In the 20th century, it was reconstructed over the ruins of the original mission, which was burnt down in 1649. And today, it continues to operate as a tourist attraction, known generally as Ste. Marie among the Hurons, under the wings of the parent company, Huronia Historical Parks, which also runs Discovery Harbour, which is a 19th century naval and military base in Penetanguishene, and the Government of Ontario's Ministry of Tourism and Recreation. And I checked that last night. The Tourism and Recreation is now Tourism, Culture, and Sport. So, changes. Though the mission community flourished for only 10 years, its history is actually surprisingly dramatic. The Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, first came to the area, which was called by its inhabitants Wendake, in 1626, so a full 13 years before they actually built a community. They were looking to build on the missionary work of the Franciscan Order's Recollet brothers, who had come to the area in hopes of converting the indigenous people there to Catholicism. They met with marginal amounts of success over the next decade. They were recalled to France in 1629 as tensions increased and the English captured Quebec. They came back in 1634 with the intent of establishing a permanent mission headquarters, which happened at Ste. Marie in 1639. Once the mission was established, it continued to grow despite some fairly considerable odds. There was a constant threat of attack from the Iroquois. The climate of Ontario was less than hospitable. And there was also considerable hostility from the Huron, who chose to remain traditional. By 1648, the mission was home to 66 men, which probably does not sound like a lot, but given that records indicate there was only about 300 Frenchmen in Canada, period, at this point, that's actually 1/5 of the French population of Canada at this point. So it is actually a fairly sizable outpost. The fact that they'd had such success with growing the size of the mission and adding to their population was something that was seen by the Jesuits as an opportunity to build a permanent colony there in Huronia. And in their letters, they occasionally refer to Ste. Marie being what they hoped would be a more Christian Quebec. So I'll let you make of that what you will. The men at Ste. Marie came from a variety of different backgrounds. The Jesuits came from the upper classes and went through approximately 14 years of extensive training before taking their final vows as priests. It's worth noting as well that the Jesuits, in addition to the traditional vows of holy orders, also take a vow of mobility, which means that the Pope can send them anywhere in the world, which is part of why they came to Huronia. Few of the Jesuits spent really all that much time at the mission proper, because their mandate for conversion meant that they actually spent most of their time out in the Wendat villages, trying to convert them by actually living with them. There were 3 men at the Jesuit level: the Père Supérieur, the Directeur Spirituel, and the Procurateur. So the Father Superior, the Spiritual Director, and the Procurator, who would have formed the infrastructure that actually stayed at the mission. And there may have been other Jesuits who were there from time to time. It would be a bit of a waypoint for them as they moved from mission to mission.